Hello, if you like me, love these miniature orchids that come with a range of different colors and also you can fit them almost everywhere inside your home, stay here with me because today we will explore miniature Phalaenopsis care and culture. So let's start. Just as sort of an introduction, these orchids, they are pretty affordable, at least in Europe. I live in the UK, so I know that in the continent we can find these orchids almost everywhere, from garden centers to supermarkets, flower shops, and usually they are pretty affordable. Another advantage is this one is a purple one. Usually purple is a very common color with Phalaenopsis, purple, pinkish and whites. But more than that, we also can find yellow, orange, and a multiple of different patterns, including peloric and non-peloric, with different leaves, different shapes. It is a versatile orchid, and it's also beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And as I said before, it can fit everywhere. The reason why I adore this plant so much, in contrast with the big Phalaenopsis, the known like moth orchid, it's because I have a large collection and I live in a flat. So if you live in a flat as well or in a small home, these orchids can be great additions because they are super tough. And again, you can basically place them everywhere around your home. The large one is more difficult for you to fit in your shelving on other places if you have lots of other houseplants as well. So to start, just to change it a little bit because this one is so beautiful. It's not as tiny as the other one, so this one is not a tiny Phalaenopsis. I would say that this one is like more towards the medium side, but nonetheless it's beautiful. Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. The difference between these ones and the larger ones is the size. Although some of them will grow a little bit larger over the years, they will never become a large Phalaenopsis. So it's not they are baby plants and one day they will become mature and they will grow as large as the bigger ones that you see in supermarkets. No, that's not the case. They are different. These ones, they are medium or a small size Phalaenopsis. So they will never become a large leaves and super large flowers like the other ones that you also find in supermarkets. That's like the biggest difference between them. More than that, the care and culture, it's very similar. Both of them are Phalaenopsis hybrids. Both of them are epiphytes. That means they grow on top of trees and tree trunks, not inside heavy soil, packed soil. So if you pot other Phalaenopsis in a mix of bark or maybe bark and moss or in organic medium, anything that you use that it can be used for epiphyte plants that will provide air to the roots and also some moist, because we don't want to water them every day, only if you have time for it. If you do, and if you have an outside area with trees and you have a good weather that we won't have freezing conditions, you can definitely attach it to a tree or tree trunk or to a cork, for example, and have it mounted inside your home. It's also great. But this video specifically, it's about potted plants that we have in our house. So I focus on the potting material. I use bark and moss for most of my orchids. Some of them are potted only in bark and I have some in moss, but most of them is a mixture of bark and moss. I live in a cold country, so if you do live in a space where you have longer winter and shorter summer, I would advise you to add more bark or have it potted in full bark, because bark, it's a great material to offer air to the roots of your plant, and usually you avoid root rot, which is very important because if these plants stay moist for a very long time and you don't have experience with it, the roots can get wet longer than it should, especially during winter, autumn and beginning of spring, and they may rot and die. And if you lose the roots of your plant can become very dehydrated and you can even lose your whole plant. So what I would advise if you are a beginner is to use maybe full bark. Bark is very easy to work with you pot your plant. Usually most of them will come potted in bark. And for you to water your plant, every time that you look at the roots of your orchid, I've just watered mine, so it's very, very wet. So that's why the roots are green. But when you look to the root of your orchid and it is gray, that means that it needs some water. So you can fill up the container, leave it here inside the container for like 10 to 15 minutes, and then you remove, throw all the water away and place it back in your shelving. That's how you know when you should water. Some places gonna be each week, other places 10 days, other places maybe twice a week. It depends how warm and dry is your environment. But the main tip here is for you to look at the roots of your orchid. The roots will tell you when it needs some water. And if you fill up the container, don't water it from above. You have greater chances of not rotting any part of your plant. Because when we water our plants from above, some water can get trapped between the leaves, and then we can have disease. If you get water trapped here without enough air circulation, what happens is some pathogens can multiply, and then you may have crown rot or stem rot. These are diseases that can also kill your plant. So for you to avoid that, remember to water from below, especially if you're starting a new collection of orchids now. You don't want to lose this precious thing. These plants come from tropical countries, so usually they grow on top of trees and tree trunks. They are used to deal with heavy rains during summertime and then maybe drought periods during wintertime. However, in nature, they are not potted like that. They are not standing upwards. Usually, when they are attached to trees and tree trunks, they are going to be like that. So they will be hanging. And also in nature, although the leaves will become completely wet, you have lots of air circulations with winds, and also you have lots of humidity around, and you have different pathogens as well, microorganisms that live in that environment. So your home is very different from that. So if you want to have a healthy plant, I would advise you to fill up the container and remove your plant. I think it's the best way to avoid crown rot. Or you can gently add some water far from where the leaves are. So that's my first tip when talking, actually more than one, because we talked about root rot, we talked about stem rot and crown rot. Very important things to avoid. These are the main cause of issues that even I have with my Phalaenopsis when they die. Usually that's one of these things that happen to them. But don't think that you leave your Phalaenopsis there forever. You won't water it and it will thrive. There are some people that believe the orchids thrive if you don't look after them properly. That's not actually true. If you want your orchid to be healthy, produce many roots, many leaves, and a beautiful bloom show for you, you need to water it when it needs water and add it some fertilized to its water as well. Here in London, you can find different types of fertilizer made for orchids. So if you are a beginner, you can go to any garden center and look for orchid fertilizer and add it to the water that you use. Add the amount that it indicates on the formula. That's the best thing that you can do. You can fertilize your plant maybe each week during springtime. What I do is each 2 weeks I will fertilize it all year round, because this plant is always producing roots and new leaves and flower spikes. And I also add some slow release fertilizer to these potting mix. It's also a good idea in case you forget to fertilize sometimes. It can happen. So you can also add a few bits of slow release fertilizer to the orchid pot when you are potting it, because then you are offering to your plant water, nutrients. And now we have to talk about humidity. In nature, especially in tropical forests, you have a lot of humidity around, but these plants, they are not they are not picky with humidity, so they are perfect for our home environments. If you're happy and comfortable, they will be comfortable. They love high humidity, but they won't mind if you don't have high humidity around. They will thrive, so humidity is not an issue with this plant if you keep it to water. However, when you talk about lighting, Phalaenopsis, they are low light orchids, low to intermediate, don't live in a dark space, they won't grow, but they need some light, but not direct sunlight, so you have to avoid high light exposure, especially midday sun. If you live in a very hot country, place it in a shaded corner or somewhere with indirect bright light. It will love it. If you have some growing lights, it will grow super well under growing light as well. It's different from Cattleyas and some types of dendrobiums that need pretty bright light to be able to grow and produce blooms and all that. These ones, as I said before, they are pretty versatile. So you can place them anywhere and they will be super happy and will be able to thrive even with indirect sunlight. That's why Phalaenopsis are so popular, because we can basically grow them everywhere in our house and they will thrive and they will be happy. Let's talk about temperature, shall we? There is something important about this type of Phalaenopsis, these Phalaenopsis hybrids. They are great, they are very, as I said, adaptable to our home environments. However, they need intermediate temperature to warm temperature during all year round, except for autumn and winter. They do need a drop in temperature to be able to bloom. That's how nurseries and supermarkets, they have them in bloom all year round, because they are placed in environments where the temperature is pretty cold and will induce spiking whenever they want it to be induced. In our homes, these plants, they will bloom, produce flower spikes when it's autumn or winter, when the temperature drops to below 20 degrees Celsius. So these plants will feel that the temperature change and we start pushing through flower spikes. So these plants, they are seasonal plants. They need the drop in temperature to be able to bloom. If you live in a place that it's warm all year round, you don't have any differentiation between winter and summer, so I would advise you to go to other types of orchids and maybe Polychilous Phalaenopsis, not these ones, because you may not rebloom them if you don't have a drop in temperature. For example, I'm from Brazil. There are places in Brazil, when we talk about the northeast of Brazil, if you're not on the mountains, for example, that is very close to the equator, so the temperature is warm all year round. So I imagine that in these regions, may be very, very hard for you to have this kind of Phalaenopsis, but Cattleyas will thrive amazingly there. So look for plants that are adequate for your region and for where you are in the world. Let's talk about blooming. As I said, for you to have beautiful blooms, you need to have a drop in temperature to be able to rebloom these plants. So when it's autumn to winter, these plants will start spiking and producing beautiful flowers. If, however, you've just acquired your plant and your plant haven't adapted to your environment yet, it's not very healthy, maybe it won't push through a flower spike, and that's fine. Maybe you have beautiful flowers in the next season, but not now. So don't worry, you wait, and the next season it will be fine for you. However, if your plant is very unhealthy, if you look at the leaves and the leaves are wrinkled, dehydrated, limpy, and decided to push through a flower spike, and you can see that your plants don't have many roots inside the pot, and it's very, very dehydrated. So if that's the case, cut the flower spike, because your plant will be able to save energy to produce new roots and new leaves and survive. The flower spike will consume the energy that your plant could use to become healthier again. So if that's your case, I would advise you not to wait for the flower spike. Cut it, let your plant recover, and then in the next year you can have beautiful blooms. However, if you have beautiful leaves, roots, your Phalaenopsis is plumpy, it will push a flower spike between autumn and winter. So end of winter, beginning of spring, you have beautiful blooms. The advantage of these Phalaenopsis is that they are affordable, as I said before, and also you can find different colors of flowers. This one is pink with white, and this one is a perfumed one. You have others with darker shades of pinks and red, purple, yellow. So you can find a myriad of different colors around, and some different shapes as well to these plants, and they will definitely brighten your environment when they are in bloom. Talking still about flowers, what I usually do, these plants, like the big ones, they will spike, bloom, and then when it's summer, it starts producing new roots and new leaves. They can still spike, some of them will keep pushing through new branches, and they will bloom for you. That's a personal choice. What I usually do is when it's the end of spring, I will cut these flower spikes towards the base and leave my plants to produce new leaves, new roots, and I will wait for new blooms in the next season. I don't need to have them in bloom all the time. I prefer them to healthily grow new structures than to be in bloom all the time. However, if you feel and you fancy to keep the branches on, it's up to you. There are some people that say that the older branch, sometimes they can push through not so many flowers, and maybe the flowers produced with the new branches, they can get a little bit smaller and not so bright in colors. Maybe you can experience with that and see what's your preference. But if your plant is stressed, if you notice that your plant's not producing so many leaves, if the leaves, like that's one case, it was attacked by thrips. So as you can see that the new leaves is not as large as the last leaf here, because this plant was stressed. I reported. If you notice that the leaves are coming smaller and smaller each time, it means that your plant is stressed. So it would be good for you to repot it or to cut the flower spike. So you need to check if your leaves are hydrated, if you touch them, they are not lumpy or papery, wrinkled. You need to check if you have roots on your plant and if your roots are not dead, and then the leaves will be pretty dehydrated. If you check that the leaves are coming smaller and smaller each time, your plant is also suffering with something. In this case, I would advise you to cut the flower spike and leave your plants to recover over time. However, if your plant is pretty healthy and you fancy to leave your plant branching out for longer to see what happens, you definitely can do that as well. It's your plant, it's your personal choice, but always pay attention to the health of your plant because it's really important. If you have a healthy Phalaenopsis, you have more chances to have beautiful blooms in the next season. And we love these beautiful blooms, don't we? The last thing before I conclude this video is, if your plant is pretty stressed, even if you had crown rot, something happened to the crown, or stem rot, if you start losing the top leaves of your Phalaenopsis, that's a bad sign. It means that you have some sort of rot. Don't throw your plant away, because maybe these tiny creatures, they can push out new baby plants that are called keikis. So keikis are baby plants, baby Phalaenopsis. If you have your plant in bloom and you notice that it's losing the top leaf, leave the spike. Don't cut the flower spike, because the flower spike may be able to push out a keiki that is a tiny Phalaenopsis. So if you notice that something is wrong here, you're losing the top leaves, you can leave the flower spike because you have more chances of having a keiki. So that's the case where I would advise, although your plant is unhealthy, you have some issues there, I wouldn't cut the keiki because you have one more chance to have a baby Phalaenopsis that you can remove from the mother plant when it's large and big enough and plant it separately, and you'll be able to save your plant. So that's enough. I have a whole playlist with a lot of videos talking about these issues with Phalaenopsis orchids, how to report them and how to report keikis. I will leave it down below. But what I want to tell you, just to conclude this on a positive note, is these plants, they are very resilient, very easy to look after, and as I said before, they can brighten your day up, especially if you live in a country like I do, that winters get really dark and cold. So these plants, they bring me so much joy, and I love them because, as I said, I can fit them everywhere and I can look around and find different ones. There is always a new hybrid around, and they are good for my pocket as well because they don't cost a lot of money and I can find them locally. So if you have mini Phalaenopsis at home, I hope you're enjoying your blooms. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, leave a comment down below, it helps me a lot, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye!